Sarah Martinez never imagined that a piece of electrical tape would change everything. Working the midnight shift at Norfolk Naval Station's administrative building, she'd grown accustomed to the endless parade of paperwork that crossed her desk. Personnel transfers, equipment requisitions, routine maintenance reports, all part of the unglamorous but essential work that kept America's naval operations running smoothly. But on this particular Tuesday night in October, something caught Admiral Rebecca Thornton's eye that would unravel a mystery buried for over 2 decades. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The fluorescent lights hummed their familiar tune as Sarah settled into her workstation at 11:47 p.m. The graveyard shift at Building 127 was typically quiet, with only the security guards making their rounds and the occasional officer stopping by to file urgent paperwork. Sarah had volunteered for these hours 3 years ago when her daughter Emma started having nightmares. Being home during the day meant she could drive Emma to school and be there when she got home. At 28, Sarah had found her rhythm in this job. She wasn't a career Navy like her father had been, but her position as a GS-7 administrative specialist provided stability and decent benefits. The work itself was straightforward: scan incoming documents, verify signatures and clearance levels, then route everything to the appropriate departments. It required attention to detail, but rarely any real decision-making. Tonight's batch seemed typical enough: transfer orders for 3 petty officers heading to San Diego, a requisition for new communications equipment bound for the USS Gerald Ford, maintenance schedules for the dry dock facilities. Sarah's fingers moved efficiently across her keyboard, entering data and checking boxes with practiced precision. Around 1:15 a.m., she reached for the next folder in her stack, a thick manila envelope marked Historical Records Review, Priority Filing. The classification stamp indicated it had already been cleared for processing, though Sarah noticed the paperwork looked older than usual. The documents inside were photocopies, some slightly faded, dating back to the early 2000s. Most were routine personnel files that had apparently been digitized and were now being transferred to long-term storage. Sarah began her usual process: verify the classification markings, check that all required signatures were present, then scan each page into the digital archive system. The work was methodical, almost meditative in the quiet building. She was about halfway through the stack when something unusual caught her attention. One of the documents, a personnel transfer order from 2003, had a small piece of black electrical tape stuck to the bottom right corner. It looked like someone had tried to cover something up, though the tape had begun to lift slightly after 20 years. Sarah's training told her to process the document as is and move on. Tampering with official records, even something as minor as strictly prohibited. But her curiosity got the better of her. The tape was barely hanging on anyway, and if there was important information underneath, shouldn't it be properly documented? She glanced around the empty office, then carefully peeled back the edge of the tape. Underneath was a small emblem she didn't immediately recognize: a submarine silhouette with what looked like an atom symbol and some text that was partially obscured. She could make out USS and what might have been Seawolf, though the print was faded. Sarah knew enough about naval insignia to realize this looked significant. Submarine patches weren't typically found on routine administrative paperwork, especially ones that someone had apparently tried to conceal. She photographed the patch with her phone, planning to research it during her break. The personnel file itself belonged to a chief petty officer named Michael Rodriguez, transferred from classified assignment to shore duty at Naval Submarine Base Kings Bay in Georgia. The order was signed by a Captain James Morrison, though Sarah noted the signature looked unusually rushed compared to the careful penmanship typically found on official documents. As she continued processing the file, other details began to stand out. Rodriguez's service record showed a gap of nearly 18 months between 2001 and 2003, simply marked as Special Assignment, Classification Level Restricted. His medical records included several psychological evaluations and what appeared to be treatment for severe anxiety and insomnia. Most intriguing was a handwritten note in the margin, barely visible. Recommend immediate transfer upon completion of debriefing protocol. Subject exhibits signs of significant stress related to Project Neptune assignments. Sarah had never heard of Project Neptune, but the secrecy surrounding Rodriguez's file suggested it was far more significant than routine submarine duty. She made mental notes of the details, planning to research what she could during her remaining shift. At 3:22 a.m., the quiet of Building 127 was broken by the sound of footsteps in the main corridor. Sarah looked up to see Admiral Rebecca Thornton walking purposefully toward her workstation, accompanied by a younger officer she didn't recognize. Admiral Thornton was known throughout Norfolk as a no-nonsense leader who rarely made appearances during night shifts unless something important was happening. "Miss Martinez," Admiral Thornton said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to immediate attention. "I understand you're processing some historical records tonight." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. "Yes, ma'am, just routine archival work from the Historical Records Review." Admiral Thornton's eyes moved to the documents spread across Sarah's desk, lingering on the file with the partially removed tape. "I see you've encountered Chief Rodriguez's transfer orders." The fact that Admiral Thornton knew specifically which file Sarah was processing sent a chill down her spine. "Yes, ma'am, I noticed some tape that was coming loose and you discovered what was underneath," Admiral Thornton finished. Her expression was unreadable, but Sarah sensed she was being evaluated. "Tell me, Miss Martinez, what do you know about submarine operations?" Sarah chose her words carefully. "Only basic information, ma'am. I know submarines are classified vessels and that many of their operations are sensitive in nature." Admiral Thornton nodded slowly, then picked up Rodriguez's file. She examined the exposed patch for several seconds before looking back at Sarah. "This particular insignia represents something that officially never happened. A mission that, according to all public records, was never authorized and never took place." Sarah's mouth went dry. She was clearly in the middle of something far beyond her security clearance or need-to-know status. Should I not have seen this? "Under normal circumstances, no," Admiral Thornton replied. "But circumstances change, and sometimes the universe has a way of putting the right person in the right place at the right time." She paused, studying Sarah's face intently. "How would you feel about taking on additional responsibilities, Miss Martinez? Responsibilities that would require a significant upgrade to your security clearance?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Sarah realized that her simple discovery had somehow thrust her into a situation with implications she couldn't begin to understand. Admiral Thornton was offering her something, but what exactly, and at what cost? "I'm not sure I understand what you're asking, ma'am." Admiral Thornton exchanged a glance with her companion, then turned back to Sarah. "Project Neutron officially ended in 2003. Officially, it never involved nuclear submarines conducting surveillance operations in international waters. Officially, Chief Rodriguez and 12 other sailors never spent 18 months aboard the USS Seawolf tracking foreign submarine movements near critical shipping lanes." Sarah felt the weight of each word. Admiral Thornton was sharing classified information with her, which meant either she was about to be sworn to secrecy or recruited for something larger. "But unofficially," Sarah asked quietly, "unofficially, Miss Martinez, we may need someone with your particular skills and clearance level to help us understand why Chief Rodriguez's file has surfaced now, 20 years later, and why someone tried very hard to make sure that patch stayed hidden." Sarah's mind raced as Admiral Thornton's words settled over the quiet office. The fluorescent lights seemed brighter now, casting harsh shadows across the scattered documents that had suddenly become evidence of something far more complex than routine paperwork. "Ma'am, I think there might be some confusion," Sarah began, but Admiral Thornton raised a hand. "There's no confusion, Miss Martinez. Your background check was remarkably thorough. Bachelor's degree in Information Systems from Virginia Tech, graduated summa cum laude. 3 years of exemplary service here at Norfolk. Father was Master Chief Petty Officer Antonio Martinez, served 22 years before his death in that training accident in 2018. Admiral Thornton's voice softened slightly. I knew your father. He was a good man who understood the value of discretion. Sarah felt a familiar pang at the mention of her father, but also confusion about why Admiral Thornton would know such personal details. I appreciate that, ma'am, but I'm not sure what any of this has to do with. It has everything to do with why you're the right person for this assignment. Admiral Thornton moved closer to Sarah's workstation, her companion remaining silent near the doorway. Tell me, what do you know about your father's final assignment? The question caught Sarah off guard. He was stationed at Dam Neck, working on communications training programs. He died in an equipment malfunction during a routine exercise. Admiral Thornton exchanged another look with her companion. That's what the official report stated, yes, but your father was actually part of a special team investigating discrepancies in submarine communication logs from the early 2000s, discrepancies that appear to be connected to Project Neutron. Sarah's world tilted slightly. Her father had never mentioned anything about submarine communications or classified investigations. As far as she knew, he'd spent his final years in routine training assignments, looking forward to retirement and spending more time with Emma. I don't understand. My father never said anything about submarines or classified work. He was always very careful about operational security, but he would have mentioned something that important. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Not if he was ordered not to, Admiral Thornton replied, and not if he believed it would put his family at risk. She paused, letting that statement sink in. Your father discovered that several sailors from Project Neptune had been systematically reporting psychological distress and requesting transfers. When he started connecting the patterns, someone decided his investigation needed to be terminated. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she processed this information. Are you saying that my father's accident wasn't an accident? I'm saying your father was asking the right questions at the wrong time. And now, 20 years later, files related to his investigation are mysteriously appearing in routine paperwork processing. Admiral Thornton gestured toward Rodriguez's file. That's not a coincidence, Miss Martinez. The young officer who had accompanied Admiral Thornton stepped forward for the first time. Ma'am, Lieutenant Commander David Walsh, Naval Intelligence. We believe someone is deliberately releasing information about Project Neptune, possibly as part of a larger intelligence operation. Sarah looked between the two officers, feeling increasingly overwhelmed. But why involve me? I'm just an administrative specialist. I don't have any intelligence training or clearance for this kind of work. You have something more valuable, Admiral Thornton said. You have legitimate access to the document processing system, a security clearance that won't raise suspicions, and, most importantly, a personal motivation to find out what really happened to your father. The weight of the offer was beginning to settle on Sarah's shoulders. Taking on this assignment would mean stepping into a world she knew nothing about, potentially putting herself and Emma at risk. But it also meant finally getting answers about her father's death. What exactly are you asking me to do? Lieutenant Commander Walsh opened a tablet and showed Sarah several document images. Over the past 6 months, files related to Project Neptune have been appearing in routine processing queues at naval installations across the country. Norfolk, San Diego, Pearl Harbor, Kings Bay. Someone with high-level access is seeding these documents into normal workflows. Sarah studied the images. Each showed similar patterns, old personnel files with small pieces of tape or adhesive labels that had been partially removed, revealing submarine insignias, project codes, or classified markings underneath. The pattern suggests someone wants these files discovered, Walsh continued. But they're being careful about how the information surfaces. They're choosing low-level processors who wouldn't normally have reason to investigate further. Except you investigated further, Admiral Thornton added, which tells us you have the curiosity and attention to detail we need. Sarah set down the tablet, her mind spinning with implications. If someone is deliberately releasing classified information, why not just report it through proper channels? Why this elaborate process of hiding things in routine paperwork? Because, Admiral Thornton said grimly, we believe the person responsible is someone with enough authority that normal reporting channels would be compromised. Someone who has been covering up Project Neptune for 20 years and might be willing to eliminate anyone who gets too close to the truth. The room fell silent except for the persistent hum of fluorescent lights. Sarah thought about her father, about the questions she'd never been able to ask him, about the official story that had never quite made sense. Then she thought about Emma, sleeping safely at home, trusting that her mother would always be there to protect her. What exactly are you asking me to do? Lieutenant Commander Walsh opened a tablet and showed Sarah several document images. Over the past 6 months, files related to Project Neptune have been appearing in routine processing queues at naval installations across the country. Norfolk, San Diego, Pearl Harbor, Kings Bay. Someone with high-level access is seeding these documents into normal workflows. Sarah studied the images. Each showed similar patterns. Old personnel files with small pieces of tape or adhesive labels that had been partially removed, revealing submarine insignias, project codes, or classified markings underneath. The pattern suggests someone wants these files discovered, Walsh continued. But they're being careful about how the information surfaces. They're choosing low-level processors who wouldn't normally have reason to investigate further. Except you investigated further, Admiral Thornton added, which tells us you have the curiosity and attention to detail we need. Sarah set down the tablet, her mind spinning with implications. If someone is deliberately releasing classified information, why not just report it through proper channels? Why this elaborate process of hiding things in routine paperwork? Because, Admiral Thornton said grimly, we believe the person responsible is someone with enough authority that normal reporting channels would be compromised. Someone who has been covering up Project Neptune for 20 years and might be willing to eliminate anyone who gets too close to the truth. The room fell silent except for the persistent hum of fluorescent lights. Sarah thought about her father, about the questions she'd never been able to ask him, about the official story that had never quite made sense. Then she thought about Emma, sleeping safely at home, trusting that her mother would always be there to protect her. What exactly are you asking me to do? Lieutenant Commander Walsh opened a tablet and showed Sarah several document images. Over the past 6 months, files related to Project Neptune have been appearing in routine processing queues at naval installations across the country. Norfolk, San Diego, Pearl Harbor, Kings Bay. Someone with high-level access is seeding these documents into normal workflows. Sarah studied the images. Each showed similar patterns. Old personnel files with small pieces of tape or adhesive labels that had been partially removed, revealing submarine insignias, project codes, or classified markings underneath. The pattern suggests someone wants these files discovered, Walsh continued. But they're being careful about how the information surfaces. They're choosing low-level processors who wouldn't normally have reason to investigate further. Except you investigated further, Admiral Thornton added, which tells us you have the curiosity and attention to detail we need. Sarah set down the tablet, her mind spinning with implications. If someone is deliberately releasing classified information, why not just report it through proper channels? Why this elaborate process of hiding things in routine paperwork? Because, Admiral Thornton said grimly, we believe the person responsible is someone with enough authority that normal reporting channels would be compromised. Someone who has been covering up Project Neptune for 20 years and might be willing to eliminate anyone who gets too close to the truth. Lieutenant Commander Walsh added, we believe your father was close to identifying the person responsible for the problems with Project Neptune. His investigation files were sealed after his death, but we think the current leaks might be connected to whatever he discovered. Sarah turned back to face them. And if I refuse? Then you go back to processing routine paperwork, Emma stays in school here in Norfolk, and you live with the knowledge that your father's killer may never be brought to justice." Admiral Thornton's voice carried no judgment, just simple truth. "But the leaks will continue, and eventually someone else will start asking the same questions your father asked. And they might not be as careful as we're prepared to be." The implication was clear. Refusing wouldn't make the danger disappear. It would just leave Sarah powerless to influence the outcome. She thought about her father's final months, how distracted he'd seemed, how he'd started insisting on walking Emma to school every morning as if he was afraid to let her out of his sight. How long would this assignment last? "Unknown," Walsh replied honestly. "Could be weeks, could be months. Depends on how quickly we can identify the source of the leaks and understand their motivation." "And my regular job here?" "Would serve as cover," Admiral Thornton explained. "You'd continue processing documents as usual, but with enhanced security clearance and specific instructions about what to look for. Any files related to Project Neptune or submarine operations from the early 2000s would be flagged for special handling." Sarah returned to her desk and picked up Chief Rodriguez's file again. The submarine patch seemed to stare back at her, a small piece of fabric that had somehow become the key to 20 years of buried secrets. "If I do this, I want complete honesty about what happened to my father. No classified information exceptions, no need-to-know limitations. If you want my help, I need to know everything." Admiral Thornton considered this for a long moment. "Agreed. But understand that some of what you learn may be difficult to accept. Your father died because he was a good sailor who asked inconvenient questions. The people responsible have spent 2 decades making sure those questions stayed buried. And now someone is digging them up." "Exactly. The question is whether they want justice or revenge, and whether we can figure out which before they succeed in either goal." Sarah looked at the clock, 4:17 a.m. In a few hours, Emma would wake up and get ready for school, expecting her mother to be there with breakfast and encouragement for another normal day. By tomorrow night, Emma might be on a plane to Colorado, while Sarah began an investigation that could uncover the truth about her father's death or get her killed in the process. "I need to call Emma's school and arrange for her absence." Admiral Thornton smiled, the first genuine expression Sarah had seen from her all night. "Already handled. Official family emergency, indefinite duration. Your sister will pick her up this afternoon." Sarah shook her head, still amazed at how thoroughly they had planned every detail. "You're very confident I was going to say yes. Your father trained you well, even if he never intended to. Honor, courage, commitment, those aren't just Navy values, Miss Martinez. They're family values. And right now, both your family and your Navy need you to live up to them." 3 days later, Sarah found herself in a windowless conference room in Building 83, a nondescript structure she'd passed countless times but never entered. The space felt different from the administrative offices she was used to, heavier, more serious, with the kind of soundproofing that suggested conversations here were never meant to leave the room. Lieutenant Commander Walsh sat across from her, surrounded by file boxes, laptops, and what appeared to be a sophisticated communication setup. A large monitor on the wall displayed a map of the United States with red dots marking naval installations where suspicious document releases had occurred. "Your new security clearance came through this morning," Walsh said, sliding a badge and paperwork across the table. "TS-SCI with special access to Project Neptune materials. Congratulations, you now have higher clearance than most admirals." Sarah examined the badge, noting how different her photo looked with the serious expression required for classified documentation. "Emma got to Colorado safely?" "Confirmed. Your sister Maria said Emma thinks it's an extended vacation to help with her cousin's wedding preparations. Smart cover story. Gives us flexibility on timeline without raising questions." The relief Sarah felt was mixed with guilt. Emma had been excited about the trip, chattering about seeing snow and helping plan decorations. She had no idea her mother was potentially in danger, or that her grandfather's death might have been murder. "Let's start with what we know," Walsh continued, pulling up files on his laptop. "Project Neptune officially ran from January 2001 to March 2003. Its stated mission was to test new submarine communication systems in challenging environments. 12 sailors were assigned to the USS Seawolf for extended deployments. Sarah opened the first file he handed her. The submarine specifications were impressive. The Seawolf was one of the most advanced attack submarines in the Navy's fleet, designed for stealth operations in hostile waters. But the real mission was intelligence gathering, Walsh continued. The Seawolf was tracking foreign submarine movements in the Arctic Ocean, specifically focusing on new Russian nuclear submarines that were testing advanced propulsion systems. That doesn't sound particularly unusual, Sarah observed. Submarine reconnaissance has been happening since the Cold War. True, but Project Neptune crossed several legal and ethical boundaries. The Seawolf was operating in international waters claimed by Russia, using communication intercept technology that hadn't been approved for operational use. More importantly, the crew wasn't fully briefed on the mission parameters or the potential risks. Sarah flipped through personnel files for the 12 Project Neptune sailors. Their photos showed young men, most in their 20s, with the confident expressions typical of submarine service members. She recognized Chief Rodriguez from his transfer papers, but the others were strangers. What kind of risks? Walsh pulled up another document. The communication intercept equipment generated electromagnetic radiation that exceeded safety guidelines. Extended exposure caused neurological symptoms, severe headaches, memory problems, anxiety, insomnia. Several crew members began experiencing what can only be described as psychological breakdown. Sarah studied medical reports showing increasing incidents of panic attacks, disorientation, and what one Navy psychiatrist had described as acute stress reaction with paranoid features. The symptoms had begun appearing about 8 months into the mission. The crew started requesting transfers, some through official channels, others through backdoor communications with family members. That's when your father's investigation began. Walsh handed her a thick folder marked Martinez Antonio Special Investigation File. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she opened it. Her father's careful handwriting filled page after page of interview notes, timeline reconstructions, and analysis of submarine communication logs. Your father was initially asked to investigate communication equipment failures, Walsh explained, but he quickly realized the failures were actually attempts by Project Neptune crew members to send unauthorized messages requesting help. Sarah read through her father's notes, recognizing his methodical approach to problem-solving. He had interviewed families of submarine crew members, tracked down medical personnel who had treated the sailors, and compiled a comprehensive timeline of when symptoms had appeared and worsened. According to his analysis, someone in the command structure was deliberately suppressing reports of equipment-related health problems. Medical evaluations were being altered, transfer requests were being denied or lost in bureaucratic delays, and crew members who complained too loudly were being threatened with court-martial for compromising operational security. One of her father's interview summaries caught Sarah's attention. He had spoken with Maria Rodriguez, Chief Rodriguez's wife, who described her husband's personality change during his Project Neptune assignment. Before the deployment, Miguel was outgoing, confident, always joking around with the kids. But when he came back on leave, he was jumpy, couldn't sleep, kept checking the locks on doors and windows. He told me he couldn't talk about his work, but that something wasn't right about what they were doing out there. Sarah's throat tightened as she read her father's careful documentation of similar stories from other families. Wives describing husbands who had nightmares, parents worried about sons who had stopped calling home, children who didn't understand why daddy seemed scared all the time. Your father concluded that Project Neptune was continuing despite clear evidence of serious health risks because someone with significant authority was protecting it, Walsh said. He identified 3 possible suspects within the command structure who had both the access and motivation to cover up the problems. Sarah found the suspect list near the end of the file. 3 names, each with detailed background information and analysis of their involvement in Project Neptune decisions. Captain James Morrison, the officer who had signed Chief Rodriguez's transfer orders. Her father noted that Morrison had been instrumental in getting Project Neptune approved and had consistently minimized reports of crew health problems. Admiral Patricia Blackwood, Morrison's superior, who had ultimate authority over submarine intelligence operations. Her father had documented several instances where Blackwood had overruled medical recommendations to continue the mission. Dr. Kevin Chen, the Navy psychiatrist who had evaluated Project Neptune crew members and whose reports had been significantly edited before being submitted to higher command. Any one of them could have ordered the cover-up, Walsh explained, but your father believed the decision-making pattern suggested coordination between at least two of them. Sarah studied the photographs attached to each suspect profile. Morrison looked like a typical submarine officer, serious, confident, accustomed to command responsibility. Blackwood appeared stern but professional in her Admiral's uniform. Dr. Chen seemed younger than she had expected, with an expression that could have been either concern or calculation. What happened when my father submitted his investigation report? Walsh's expression darkened. He never got the chance. 3 days before he was scheduled to present his findings to Admiral Thornton, he died in that training accident. Sarah found the accident report in the file. Her father had been testing new communication equipment at Dam Neck when an electrical malfunction had caused a fatal shock. The investigation had concluded it was a tragic accident caused by a manufacturing defect in the equipment. Except, Walsh noted, he had 22 years of experience working with communication equipment. The idea that he would make a basic safety error that resulted in electrocution doesn't fit his training or personality. Sarah examined the technical details of the accident report. The equipment involved was a prototype radio system that her father had been asked to evaluate for potential fleet deployment. According to the report, he had been working alone in a secure testing facility when the malfunction occurred. The equipment manufacturer claimed the defect was impossible to predict and had never occurred in previous testing. But when investigators tried to examine the specific unit that killed your father, they discovered it had been destroyed in a disposal procedure that violated standard protocol for accident evidence. The pattern was becoming clear to Sarah. Her father had gotten too close to exposing Project Neptune's cover-up, and someone had arranged for him to die in a way that looked accidental while ensuring the evidence disappeared. Who ordered the equipment disposal? That's where things get interesting, Walsh said, pulling up another document. The disposal order came through normal channels, signed by the appropriate safety officer. But the timing was suspicious. Less than 48 hours after your father's death, before the official accident investigation was complete. Sarah studied the disposal authorization. The signature belonged to Commander Lisa Hayes, a name that didn't appear in her father's investigation files. Hayes was a logistics officer with no apparent connection to Project Neptune or your father's investigation. But she had the authority to authorize equipment disposal for safety reasons. So, someone used her as an unwitting accomplice? Or she was part of the cover-up and we haven't identified the connection yet, Walsh replied. That's one of the things we need to determine. Sarah closed her father's investigation file, feeling overwhelmed by the scope of the conspiracy he had uncovered. 12 sailors had been exposed to dangerous conditions, their health problems had been covered up, and when someone tried to expose the truth, that person had been murdered. You said someone is now releasing Project Neptune files through routine document processing. Do we have any idea why they're doing it now, 20 years later? Walsh switched to a different display showing a timeline of recent document releases. The pattern started 6 months ago with a single file at Naval Base San Diego. Since then, releases have been occurring roughly every 3 weeks at different installations. That's very controlled timing, almost like someone is building towards something. Exactly, and the information being revealed is getting progressively more sensitive. Early releases showed basic personnel information, names, transfer dates, medical discharge codes. Recent releases include classified mission details, communication intercepts, and now symbols like the submarine patch you found. Sarah studied the timeline, noting how each release had provided another piece of the Project Neptune puzzle. Someone was carefully orchestrating the exposure of information, ensuring each revelation built on previous disclosures. Whoever is doing this has access to the original classified files and understands how the document processing system works, she observed. They know exactly how to hide information so it will be discovered by the right people. Which brings us to our current suspects, Walsh said, bringing up photographs of the 3 individuals from her father's investigation. Morrison retired in 2010, Blackwood died of natural causes in 2018, and Dr. Chen transferred to a civilian research position in 2015. So none of them would have current access to naval document systems. Correct, but each of them would have had subordinates, colleagues, or family members who might be motivated to expose the truth now. We need to identify those connections and determine who has both the access and the motivation to orchestrate these releases. Walsh handed Sarah another file. Your assignment is to continue processing routine documents while monitoring for any additional Project Neptune materials. But you'll also be conducting background research on family members and associates of our 3 primary suspects. Sarah opened the file, finding detailed biographical information on dozens of individuals connected to Morrison, Blackwood, and Chen. Spouses, children, former subordinates, medical colleagues, anyone who might have learned about Project Neptune and decided to seek justice or revenge. This is going to take months to investigate properly. Which is why we're hoping the document releases will continue and give us additional clues, Walsh replied. Each new file tells us more about what our unknown source knows and what they're trying to accomplish. Sarah looked at the map on the wall, noting how the red dots representing document release sites formed a rough geographical pattern. Have you analyzed the locations for any significance? Walsh nodded, switching to a detailed analysis display. San Diego, Norfolk, Pearl Harbor, Kings Bay, all major submarine bases. But the timing suggests the releases are moving eastward, which might indicate our source is based on the East Coast. Or they're saving the most significant revelations for the end and expect those to have maximum impact at East Coast installations. Another possibility. That's why your position at Norfolk is so critical. If the pattern continues, we should see increasingly sensitive material appearing in your processing queue. Sarah realized she was now part of a complex chess game where she couldn't see all the pieces or predict her opponent's next move. Someone was using her to expose Project Neptune just as someone had used her father's expertise to cover it up 20 years earlier. What if the person releasing these files is actually trying to help? What if they're not seeking revenge but justice? Walsh considered the question carefully. Then we need to find them before whoever ordered your father's death realizes what's happening and decides to eliminate another threat. The weight of that possibility settled over her like a heavy blanket. She was now walking the same dangerous path her father had traveled, asking the same inconvenient questions that had gotten him killed. But unlike her father, she wasn't working alone, and she had the advantage of knowing someone was trying to kill people who got too close to the truth. When do I start the background investigations? Tomorrow. But tonight, you should go home and get some rest. You're going to need it for what comes next. 2 weeks into her new assignment, Sarah had developed a routine that felt both familiar and surreal. During the day, she processed routine naval documents in Building 127, maintaining her cover as a regular administrative specialist. But her evenings were spent in Building 83, poring over decades-old files and tracking the complex web of relationships surrounding Project Neptune. The breakthrough came on a rainy Thursday morning when another suspicious file appeared in her processing queue. This time, it was medical records from the Naval Medical Center, Portsmouth, dated 2004, a full year after Project Neptune had officially ended. The file belonged to Petty Officer Second Class Thomas Wheeler, one of the 12 Project Neptune crew members. What made it unusual was a handwritten note clipped to the front. Patient exhibits severe neurological symptoms consistent with electromagnetic radiation exposure. Recommend immediate evaluation by specialist in occupational health hazards. The note was signed by Dr. Rachel Vance, a Navy physician Sarah hadn't encountered in any previous files. More intriguingly, someone had used correction fluid to obscure part of Dr. Vance's recommendation, but the white paint had yellowed enough over 20 years that Sarah could make out the underlying text. Symptoms consistent with deliberate exposure to harmful electromagnetic fields. Sarah photographed the document and sent a secure message to Lieutenant Commander Walsh. Within an hour, he appeared at her workstation with Admiral Thornton. "Dr. Vance," Admiral Thornton said after reviewing the file, "I remember her. Brilliant physician, specializing in environmental health. She left the Navy abruptly in 2005. "Left or was forced out?" Sarah asked. "That's what we need to determine," Walsh replied. "But first, let's examine Wheeler's complete medical history." They moved to the secure conference room where Walsh accessed Wheeler's full naval medical records. The progression was alarming, starting with minor complaints about headaches and fatigue in 2003, escalating to severe neurological symptoms by 2004, and culminating in a medical discharge for service-connected disability in 2005. "Look at this," Sarah pointed to a series of specialist consultations. Wheeler was evaluated by neurologists, psychiatrists, and occupational health experts. But each time a doctor recommended further investigation into environmental causes, Wheeler was transferred to a different physician. Admiral Thornton studied the pattern. Someone was systematically preventing Wheeler from getting proper medical care that might expose the connection to Project Neptune. And Dr. Vance was the first physician to explicitly mention electromagnetic radiation exposure, Walsh noted, which explains why she suddenly left the Navy. Sarah had spent enough time analyzing her father's investigation files to recognize the pattern. "We need to find Dr. Vance. If she's still alive, she might have information about what really happened to the Project Neptune crew." Walsh was already typing on his laptop. "Dr. Rachel Vance, age 58, currently working as a civilian physician at Richmond General Hospital. No apparent connection to recent document releases, but definitely worth interviewing." "I'll arrange a meeting," Admiral Thornton said. "Unofficial, off-base, completely voluntary cooperation." As they planned the approach to Dr. Vance, Sarah noticed something else in Wheeler's file that seemed significant. His emergency contact had changed 3 times during his medical treatment, from his wife to his brother to a name she didn't recognize, Jennifer Chen. "Chen," Sarah said aloud, "as in Dr. Kevin Chen, the Navy psychiatrist from my father's suspect list?" Walsh checked the relationship notation. Jennifer Chen listed as family friend. But if she's related to Dr. Kevin Chen, she could be the connection we're looking for, Admiral Thornton finished, someone with both personal knowledge of Project Neptune and current access to naval document systems. They spent the next hour researching Jennifer Chen's background. She was Dr. Kevin Chen's daughter, 34 years old, currently working as a senior information systems analyst at Naval Sea Systems Command. Her security clearance and system access would give her exactly the capability needed to seed classified documents into routine processing queues. "But what's her motivation?" Sarah asked. "Why would she want to expose Project Neptune now?" Walsh pulled up Jennifer Chen's personal history. Her father died by suicide in 2019. According to the police report, he had been suffering from severe depression and guilt over unspecified professional decisions. The pieces were starting to fit together. Dr. Kevin Chen had been involved in covering up the health problems of Project Neptune crew members. Years later, consumed by guilt over his actions, he had taken his own life. His daughter, with access to naval computer systems, is now systematically exposing the truth he had helped conceal. "That gives her both motive and means," Admiral Thornton observed, "but we need proof before we can act." Sarah studied Jennifer Chen's photograph from her naval personnel file. She looked professional, but tired, with dark circles under her eyes that suggested someone carrying a heavy burden. If she's been releasing these documents for 6 months, she's taking enormous personal risk. Why not just submit everything at once through whistleblower channels? Because, Walsh thoughtfully, she wants maximum impact. Releasing everything simultaneously would create a brief media sensation, then disappear into congressional hearings and bureaucratic investigations. But a slow, methodical revelation forces ongoing attention and makes it harder for anyone to suppress the story. Or, Sarah suggested, she's building towards something specific. Maybe she doesn't just want to expose Project Neptune. Maybe she wants to force the people responsible to reveal themselves. Admiral Thornton looked intrigued. "Explain that theory." "Think about it. Each document release has been progressively more damaging. First, personnel records that just showed unusual patterns. Then, medical files revealing health problems. Now, direct evidence of cover-ups and physician suppression. If Jennifer Chen continues escalating, eventually she'll release something so damaging that the original conspirators will have to act to protect themselves. And when they act, they expose themselves, Walsh realized. It's like setting a trap, using classified information as bait. The implications were sobering. If Sarah's theory was correct, Jennifer Chen wasn't just seeking justice for Project Neptune victims. She was trying to flush out her father's co-conspirators by forcing them to take desperate action. Which means, Admiral Thornton said grimly, we're all potential targets once they realize what's happening. Sarah felt a chill as she considered how her father had died when he got too close to the truth. How do we protect ourselves while we investigate? By moving faster than our opponents expect, Admiral Thornton replied. If Jennifer Chen is planning something big, we need to identify it before the conspirators realize they're being hunted. Walsh opened a new file on his laptop. I'm authorizing enhanced surveillance on both Jennifer Chen and the surviving Project Neptune crew members. If she's planning a major document release, there might be communication patterns we can identify. What about Dr. Vance? Sarah asked. If she agrees to talk to us, she might have information about other physicians who were pressured to alter medical records. I'll meet with her tomorrow, Admiral Thornton said. But we need to be careful. If Jennifer Chen is monitoring naval communications, she might already know we're investigating. Sarah looked at the medical file that had started this latest development. Thomas Wheeler's suffering had been documented, suppressed, and ignored for 20 years. Now his records were helping expose the conspiracy that had destroyed his health and covered up the truth. There's something else we should consider, Sarah said. If Jennifer Chen has been planning this for months, she probably has contingency plans. What happens if we identify her before she's ready to reveal everything? Walsh considered the question. She might accelerate her timeline, dump everything at once, and disappear. Or she might have a dead man switch, automatic release of information if something happens to her. Either way, Admiral Thornton said, we need to find out what she's planning and when. Because if our theory is correct, she's about to force a confrontation that could be very dangerous for everyone involved. The meeting concluded with assignments for each team member. Admiral Thornton would interview Dr. Vance, Walsh would coordinate surveillance and communication monitoring, and Sarah would continue processing documents while researching Jennifer Chen's background and system access patterns. As Sarah walked back to Building 127, she reflected on how much her life had changed in 2 weeks. Emma was safe in Colorado, but Sarah was now part of an investigation that could expose a 20-year-old conspiracy involving murder, cover-ups, and the systematic abuse of military personnel. Her father had died trying to uncover the truth about Project Neptune. Now Sarah was following the same path, but with better preparation and more support. The question was whether that would be enough to survive what Jennifer Chen was apparently planning to unleash. Back at her regular workstation, Sarah resumed processing routine paperwork, but her mind remained focused on the larger investigation. Every document now seemed potentially significant. Every routine form could be hiding classified information that someone wanted discovered. Around 3 p.m., her secure phone buzzed with a message from Walsh. Dr. Vance agreed to meet tomorrow evening, location TBD. Also, we've identified unusual computer activity on Jennifer Chen's work account. She's been accessing historical submarine files outside her normal job responsibilities. Sarah replied, any pattern to the files she's accessing? Walsh's response came quickly, all related to submarine operations between 2000 to 2005. She's definitely researching Project Neptune, but also other submarine programs from the same time period. That revelation opened new possibilities. Maybe Project Neptune wasn't an isolated incident. Maybe it was part of a larger pattern of dangerous submarine operations that had put crew members at risk while being covered up by the same individuals. Sarah spent the rest of her shift thinking about the implications. If Jennifer Chen was investigating multiple submarine programs, her planned revelations could be far more damaging than anyone had anticipated. And if other programs had caused similar health problems and cover-ups, the number of potential victims and the scope of the conspiracy could be much larger than they had realized. As she prepared to leave for the day, another thought occurred to her. Jennifer Chen had been methodically building towards something for 6 months, carefully escalating the sensitivity of information being released, but the accelerated timeline Admiral Thornton had mentioned suggested they were running out of time. The question was, time until what? What was Jennifer Chen planning that would require her to abandon her careful, measured approach and risk everything on a single decisive action? Sarah suspected they were about to find out, and that the answer would put everyone involved in immediate danger. Her father had been killed for getting too close to the truth about Project Neptune. Now Sarah was not only close to that same truth, she was potentially about to become the target of someone who had successfully hidden their crimes for 20 years and would do anything to keep them buried. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Sarah gathered her papers and prepared for another evening of investigation. Somewhere in the files they had yet to examine, the evidence exists to prove who had ordered her father's death and why. But somewhere else, the person responsible was probably planning to ensure that evidence never came to light. The race between justice and cover-up was accelerating, and Sarah was no longer just an investigator. She was becoming the primary target of forces that had already demonstrated their willingness to kill to protect their secrets. Tomorrow's meeting with Dr. Vance might provide crucial answers, but it would also mark the point where Sarah's investigation became impossible to hide from those who had the most to lose from its success. As she walked across the darkened naval base toward her car, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The sensation might have been paranoia brought on by weeks of investigating murder and conspiracy, or it might have been the accurate instinct of someone who had become a threat to very dangerous people. Either way, Sarah realized her father's investigation was finally approaching its conclusion, one way or another. The coffee shop on Colley Avenue in Norfolk's Ghent district was busy enough to provide cover for a sensitive conversation, but quiet enough that Admiral Thornton and Sarah could speak without being overheard. Dr. Rachel Vance had chosen the location herself, arriving early and selecting a corner table that offered clear sightlines to all entrances. At 58, Dr. Vance carried herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to making life-and-death decisions, but Sarah noticed the way her eyes constantly scanned the room and how she kept her phone face down on the table within easy reach. This was a woman who had learned to be careful. "I haven't spoken about Project Neptune in 20 years, Dr. Vance said after Admiral Thornton made the introductions. "When I left the Navy, I signed agreements that technically still bind me to silence." "Agreements that were designed to cover up crimes," Admiral Thornton replied. "We're not asking you to violate legitimate security protocols. We're asking you to help us understand what really happened to those sailors." Dr. Vance studied both women carefully before speaking. "Thomas Wheeler wasn't my first Project Neptune patient. By the time I saw him in 2004, I had already treated 3 other crew members for similar neurological symptoms. But Wheeler was different. His symptoms were so severe that they couldn't be explained away as stress or adaptation disorders."
Sarah opened her tablet and showed Dr. Vance the medical file with the obscured notes. "We found your recommendation about electromagnetic radiation exposure. Someone tried to hide it. Captain Morrison ordered me to revise that assessment," Dr. Vance said, her voice tight with old anger. "He claimed that mentioning electromagnetic radiation would compromise operational security and endanger ongoing submarine operations. But you refused?" "Initially, yes. I told Morrison that medical ethics required honest documentation of occupational health hazards. That's when he brought in Dr. Kevin Chen." Sarah felt her pulse quicken at the mention of Jennifer Chen's father. What was Dr. Chen's role? Dr. Vance's expression darkened. "Chen was brought in as a psychiatric consultant to evaluate my emotional stability and fitness for naval service." The implication was clear. Either I changed my medical assessments or my own mental health would be called into question. Admiral Thornton leaned forward. "Did Chen have any medical justification for challenging your diagnoses?" "None whatsoever. Chen was a psychiatrist, not a neurologist or occupational health specialist. He had no expertise in electromagnetic radiation effects. But he had authority to recommend my removal from active duty if he deemed me psychologically unfit." The picture was becoming clearer to Sarah. Dr. Chen hadn't just participated in covering up Project Neptune health problems. He had actively intimidated physicians who tried to document the truth. "What did you do?" "I compromised," Dr. Vance admitted, shame evident in her voice. "I revised my assessments to remove specific mentions of electromagnetic radiation, though I tried to leave enough clinical detail that future physicians might recognize the pattern. The correction fluid over your original notes. That was Morrison's idea. He said it was better to physically obscure problematic language rather than create new documentation that might raise questions later." Sarah showed Dr. Vance photographs of the other Project Neptune medical files they had recovered. How many sailors were affected? Dr. Vance examined each file carefully. Of the 12 Project Neptune crew members, I personally treated 8 for neurological symptoms. The others were either transferred to different medical facilities or their symptoms were managed by physicians who were more cooperative with command preferences. More willing to ignore evidence, you mean? More willing to diagnose stress disorders and recommend psychiatric treatment instead of investigating environmental causes, Dr. Vance clarified. It was an effective strategy. Sailors who complained about physical symptoms were labeled as having mental health problems, which discredited their testimony and justified their removal from service. Admiral Thornton took notes as Dr. Vance spoke. "What happened to the sailors after they were discharged?" "Most received disability ratings for psychiatric conditions rather than service-connected injuries. It meant smaller compensation payments and no acknowledgement that their problems were caused by naval operations." Dr. Vance paused, collecting her thoughts. "I tried to maintain contact with some of them over the years. The long-term effects were devastating." "In what way?" "Chronic neurological problems, severe depression, family breakdown, substance abuse. Thomas Wheeler committed suicide in 2012. James Patterson died of an apparent overdose in 2015. Michael Rodriguez developed early-onset dementia and died in a care facility last year. The human cost of the Project Neptune cover-up was staggering. 12 sailors had volunteered for what they believed was routine submarine duty, only to be exposed to dangerous conditions and then abandoned when they developed health problems." "Dr. Vance," Sarah said carefully, "did you ever document the true extent of Project Neptune health effects? Any records that weren't altered or destroyed?" Dr. Vance hesitated, glancing around the coffee shop again. "I kept personal notes, copies of original assessments, research into electromagnetic radiation effects, communication with other physicians who treated Project Neptune crew members. I knew someday the truth would need to come out." "Where are those notes now?" "Hidden. After I left the Navy, I was contacted by investigators who claimed to be conducting a routine review of submarine medical protocols. But their questions were too specific, too focused on what I might have documented." Admiral Thornton and Sarah exchanged glances. The cover-up had continued well beyond 2005, with active efforts to locate and eliminate any remaining documentation. "Have you been contacted recently by anyone asking about Project Neptune?" "No direct contact," Dr. Vance said. "But 3 months ago, someone broke into my home. Nothing valuable was taken, but my home office was thoroughly searched. Files were disturbed, my computer was accessed, and several medical textbooks from my naval years were missing." Sarah felt a chill. "Did you report the break-in?" "To the police, yes. But I didn't mention the connection to my naval service. I was afraid that might make things worse." "The timing of the break-in was significant. 3 months ago was exactly when Jennifer Chen's document releases had begun escalating in sensitivity. Someone was trying to locate and eliminate any documentation that could support the leaked information." "Dr. Vance," Admiral Thornton said, "we believe someone is systematically releasing Project Neptune files through naval document processing channels. Have you had any contact with Jennifer Chen, Dr. Kevin Chen's daughter?" Dr. Vance's reaction was immediate and startled. "Jennifer Chen contacted me 6 months ago. She said she was researching her father's naval career and wanted to understand his work on submarine medical protocols." "What did you tell her?"
I was careful not to reveal specifics, but I confirmed that her father had been involved in evaluating submarine crew medical issues. She seemed particularly interested in cases where psychiatric diagnoses had been used to explain physical symptoms. Sarah realized they were getting confirmation of their theory. Jennifer Chen had been methodically researching Project Neptune for months, using her father's connection to identify physicians and victims who could provide evidence of the cover-up. Did Jennifer Chen ask about your documentation or medical records? She asked if I had maintained any research files from my naval service, but I didn't admit to keeping personal notes. Something about her questions made me cautious. Cautious how? Dr. Vance considered her words carefully. Jennifer seemed knowledgeable about specific details that she shouldn't have known unless she had access to classified files. She mentioned electromagnetic radiation effects and specific crew member symptoms that weren't in any public records. The implication was clear. Jennifer Chen had been accessing classified Project Neptune files and using that information to guide her investigation. Her document releases weren't random. They were part of a comprehensive research effort to build a complete case against the conspirators. Dr. Vance, Sarah said, we think Jennifer Chen is planning to release comprehensive evidence about Project Neptune. If that happens, the people responsible for the cover-up might take extreme action to protect themselves. What kind of extreme action? Admiral Thornton answered bluntly. Sarah's father was murdered when he got too close to exposing Project Neptune. We believe the same people are still active and still dangerous. Dr. Vance went pale. Are you saying I'm in danger? We're saying that anyone with evidence about Project Neptune is potentially at risk, Admiral Thornton replied. That's why we need your help to resolve this situation safely. What are you asking me to do? Sarah leaned forward. We need access to your personal documentation, medical records, research notes, communication with other physicians, anything that could prove the scope of the cover-up and identify who ordered it. And in exchange? Protection, Admiral Thornton said. Official witness protection if necessary, and a guarantee that your evidence will be used to seek justice rather than create another cover-up. Dr. Vance sat quietly for several minutes, weighing the risks and benefits of cooperation. Finally, she spoke. The documentation is hidden in a safety deposit box in Richmond, but there's something else you need to know. What? I wasn't the only physician who kept personal records. Dr. Amanda Foster, who treated Project Neptune crew members at Portsmouth Naval Hospital, also maintained unofficial documentation. She died in a car accident in 2016, but before her death, she told me she had given copies of her files to someone she trusted. Sarah felt her heart rate increase. Do you know who? Foster mentioned a family member in the Navy, someone with security clearance who could ensure the information would be preserved safely. She was worried about the same kind of break-ins and intimidation that I experienced. A family member with security clearance, Admiral Thornton replied. That could be almost anyone in the naval command structure. Dr. Vance shook her head. Foster was specific about one detail. This person worked in information systems and had access to historical naval records. She said they were in a position to ensure her documentation would surface at the right time. The description matched Jennifer Chen's position perfectly. If Dr. Foster had given her Project Neptune files to a family member in naval information systems, Jennifer Chen might have access to medical evidence that went far beyond her father's psychiatric evaluations. Dr. Vance, Sarah said, we need to get your safety deposit contents immediately. If Jennifer Chen has Foster's files and is planning a major revelation, anyone else with evidence could become a target. Dr. Vance nodded slowly. I can retrieve the files tomorrow morning when the bank opens, but I want guarantees about how they'll be used. You have them? Admiral Thornton said. This investigation is about justice, not politics. The people responsible for Project Neptune need to face consequences for what they did to those sailors and their families. As they prepared to leave the coffee shop, Dr. Vance had one final question. Do you really think Jennifer Chen is going to expose everything? Sarah considered what they had learned about Jennifer's methodical approach, her access to classified files, and her apparent possession of multiple physicians' documentation. I think she's been building a comprehensive case for months, and she's almost ready to present it. The question is whether we can identify the remaining conspirators before they realize what's coming. And what happens if we can't? Admiral Thornton's expression was grim. Then we're all going to find out just how far these people are willing to go to protect secrets that should have been exposed 20 years ago. They left the coffee shop separately, with plans to meet the following evening after Dr. Vance retrieved her documentation. As Sarah drove back to Norfolk, she reflected on the scope of what they had uncovered. Project Neptune wasn't just a case of negligent leadership or bureaucratic indifference. It was a deliberate conspiracy that had destroyed the lives of 12 sailors and their families, murdered at least one investigator, and continues to operate 20 years ago.
Jennifer Chen was apparently preparing to expose the entire conspiracy, but in doing so, she was putting herself and anyone with supporting evidence at enormous risk. The people who had ordered Sarah's father's death were still in positions where they could order more killings, and they now had every reason to believe their 20-year-old secret was about to be revealed. Tomorrow would bring Dr. Vance's evidence and potentially the final pieces needed to identify the remaining conspirators. But it would also mark the point where their investigation became impossible to hide from the people they were investigating. Sarah realized that her father's murder might soon be joined by others, unless they could move faster than their opponents expected. The question was whether justice could finally be served, or whether the Project Neptune cover-up would claim more victims before the truth could be revealed. Based on what they had learned about the lengths these conspirators would go to protect their secrets, Sarah suspected they were about to find out just how dangerous the pursuit of truth could be. The Richmond Security Bank on Broad Street looked unremarkable from the outside, but Sarah knew it held 20 years of hidden truth in its safety deposit boxes. She sat in the parking lot with Lieutenant Commander Walsh, watching Dr. Vance through the bank's windows as she retrieved her carefully preserved documentation. It was 10:30 a.m., and the bank had been open for only 30 minutes. Dr. Vance had arrived precisely when the doors unlocked, clearly anxious to complete this task quickly and safely. Sarah noticed how the physician checked over her shoulder repeatedly and kept her phone visible, ready to call for help if needed. "Any unusual activity on Jennifer Chen's computer accounts?" Sarah asked Walsh while they waited. "Significant escalation in the past 48 hours," Walsh replied, consulting his tablet. "She's been accessing submarine operation files from 2000 to 2005, medical databases, personnel records, and communication logs. It looks like she's compiling everything into a comprehensive database. Timeline for release? Unknown, but the pattern suggests she's in the final preparation stages. She's also been researching media contacts, congressional committee staff, and whistleblower protection procedures." Sarah watched Dr. Vance emerge from the bank carrying a large manila envelope and a small metal file box. The physician moved quickly to her car, constantly scanning the parking lot for potential threats. 20 minutes later, they were back in the secure conference room in Building 83, with Dr. Vance's documentation spread across the table like pieces of a complex puzzle. Admiral Thornton had joined them, along with a Navy stenographer, to create an official record of what they were about to discover. "I kept everything," Dr. Vance said, her voice steady but tense. "Original medical assessments, copies of altered reports, research papers on electromagnetic radiation effects, correspondence with other physicians, and personal notes documenting pressure from command staff." The first document Sarah examined was Dr. Vance's original assessment of Thomas Wheeler, dated 6 months before the version they had found in his official file. The differences were striking. The original clearly stated that Wheeler's neurological symptoms were consistent with exposure to high-intensity electromagnetic radiation and recommended immediate removal from the environment pending investigation of occupational hazards. The altered version in Wheeler's official file mentioned only stress-related symptoms and recommended psychological evaluation and potential psychiatric treatment. "Captain Morrison personally supervised the alterations," Dr. Vance explained. "He had me rewrite each assessment 3 times until the language was sufficiently vague to avoid mentioning electromagnetic radiation or occupational hazards.
Admiral Thornton examined a folder labeled Command Correspondence. It contained copies of messages between Morrison, Admiral Blackwood, and Dr. Chen discussing how to manage problematic medical assessments and overly specific diagnostic language. One message from Admiral Blackwood was particularly damning. Medical documentation must support operational requirements. Physicians who cannot adapt their assessments to mission needs should be reassigned to positions where their judgments will not compromise national security interests. Blackwood was ordering physicians to lie in medical records, Walsh observed. More than that, Dr. Vance said, she was creating a system where accurate medical documentation was treated as a security threat. Any physician who documented the true health effects of Project Neptune was branded as disloyal or mentally unstable. Sarah found a folder containing Dr. Vance's research into electromagnetic radiation effects. The scientific literature clearly showed that prolonged exposure to the type of equipment used on Project Neptune could cause exactly the neurological symptoms documented in the submarine crew. This research existed in 2003, Sarah said. Command staff would have known they were exposing sailors to dangerous conditions. They did know, Dr. Vance confirmed. I provided copies of this research to Captain Morrison and Admiral Blackwood in writing. Morrison's response was that mission requirements override safety concerns and that crew health problems would be managed through medical channels rather than operational changes.
Admiral Thornton was examining a separate folder labeled Dr. Foster Communication. It contained letters and secure messages between Dr. Vance and Dr. Amanda Foster documenting their shared concerns about Project Neptune medical cover-ups. Foster treated the most severe cases, Dr. Vance explained, sailors who were transferred to Portsmouth when their symptoms became impossible to ignore. She documented everything, just as I did. Sarah read one of Dr. Foster's messages aloud. The neurological damage in these patients is permanent and progressive. Command staff are asking me to discharge them with psychiatric diagnoses, but that's medical fraud. These men were injured in the line of duty and deserve honest documentation and appropriate compensation. Foster refused to alter her medical assessments? Walsh asked. For almost a year, yes, but eventually the pressure became overwhelming. Her department chief threatened her with court-martial for failure to follow lawful orders and conduct prejudicial to good order and discipline. Dr. Vance handed Admiral Thornton another document, Dr. Foster's final message, sent just days before her death in the 2016 car accident. The text was brief but ominous. Rachel, they're not going to let this stay buried much longer. I've given copies of everything to someone who can ensure the truth comes out when the time is right. If something happens to me, look for the information to surface through official channels. The implication was clear. Dr. Foster had anticipated her own death and made arrangements for her documentation to be preserved and eventually revealed. Foster mentioned giving files to a family member with security clearance, Sarah said. We think that person might be Jennifer Chen. Dr. Vance nodded. Foster never told me the specific identity, but she did mention that this person worked in naval information systems and had experience with historical records management. The description fits someone in Jennifer Chen's position. Admiral Thornton was studying a timeline Dr. Vance had created showing the progression of Project Neptune health problems and subsequent cover-up efforts. The pattern was methodical and comprehensive. Every attempt to document or investigate the truth had been systematically suppressed. Dr. Vance, Admiral Thornton said, this documentation proves conspiracy, medical fraud, and violation of federal laws protecting military personnel. Why didn't you take it to federal prosecutors or congressional investigators? I tried, Dr. Vance replied. In 2010, I contacted the House Armed Services Committee staff. I was told that my allegations were being reviewed, but I never heard back. In 2014, I reached out to the Department of Veterans Affairs about Project Neptune disability claims. They said all records related to the submarine program were classified and couldn't be reviewed by their physicians. The cover-up extended beyond the Navy, Walsh realized. It had to, Dr. Vance said. Too many people knew pieces of the truth, physicians, administrative staff, family members of affected sailors. Keeping the secret required cooperation from multiple agencies and departments. Sarah was examining a folder containing photographs and medical scans showing the progression of neurological damage in Project Neptune sailors. The images were disturbing. Brain scans showing tissue damage, photographs of sailors displaying tremors and coordination problems, medical charts documenting cognitive decline over time. These men were systematically poisoned, Sarah said, her voice tight with anger. And when they tried to get help, they were labeled as mentally ill and discharged from service. The cruelest part, Dr. Vance added, was that their psychiatric diagnoses followed them into civilian life. Many couldn't get proper medical care because doctors assumed their symptoms were psychological rather than neurological. Admiral Thornton closed the folder she had been reviewing and looked directly at Dr. Vance. "Doctor, I need to ask you a difficult question. Based on your knowledge of the medical evidence and the people involved in the cover-up, who do you believe was ultimately responsible for ordering the suppression of evidence?" Dr. Vance considered the question carefully. Admiral Blackwood had ultimate authority over submarine operations, but the medical cover-up required expertise that she didn't possess. Someone with detailed knowledge of naval medical procedures and psychiatric protocols had to design the system for suppressing evidence. Dr. Chen was involved, but I don't think he was the architect. The strategy was too sophisticated, too well coordinated across multiple departments. This required someone with broader authority and deeper knowledge of naval administrative systems. Sarah thought about the personnel files they had reviewed. What about Commander Lisa Hayes? She authorized the disposal of equipment that killed my father. Hayes was a logistics officer, Dr. Vance replied. She would have followed orders without necessarily understanding their significance. But whoever gave her those orders knew exactly what evidence needed to be destroyed and when. Admiral Thornton was making notes as they spoke. "We need to identify the person who coordinated activities between submarine operations, medical departments, and administrative systems." Walsh pulled up organizational charts on his laptop. Cross-referencing personnel with authority over operations, medical, and administration during the Project Neptune timeframe. He typed rapidly, then looked up with a surprised expression. There's only one person who had oversight authority in all three areas. Who? Admiral Patricia Blackwood had operational authority, but her deputy for administrative coordination was Captain Rebecca Thornton. The room fell silent as everyone processed this information. Admiral Thornton, the person leading their current investigation, had been in a position to coordinate the original Project Neptune cover-up.
Sarah felt her world tilt as the implications became clear. They had been working with someone who might have been responsible for her father's death. Admiral Thornton's expression was unreadable as she looked around the room. "Yes, I was Captain Blackwood's deputy from 2002 to 2005. I had administrative oversight for all submarine special operations during that period." "Including Project Neptune?" Walsh asked carefully. "Including Project Neptune," Admiral Thornton confirmed. "But I wasn't involved in the medical cover-up. In fact, I was the one who recommended terminating the program when health problems became apparent." Dr. Vance was studying Admiral Thornton with new intensity. "I remember you now. You tried to get medical evaluations included in operational planning. Captain Morrison complained that you were being overly cautious about crew health concerns." Morrison was following Blackwood's orders to prioritize mission completion over crew safety, Admiral Thornton said. "When I insisted on an independent medical review, Blackwood had me transferred to a different assignment." Sarah's mind was racing as she tried to process this revelation. "You were removed from Project Neptune oversight because you tried to protect the sailors? And because I was asking too many questions about why medical assessments were being altered," Admiral Thornton confirmed. "Blackwood claimed I was interfering with operational security, but I knew she was covering up evidence of crew injuries. The pieces were falling into place differently than Sarah had expected. Admiral Thornton hadn't been part of the conspiracy. She had been another victim of it, silenced through reassignment when she tried to expose the truth." "Admiral," Walsh said carefully, "why didn't you mention this connection when we began the investigation?" Because I needed to verify that the current document releases were legitimate before revealing my own involvement. If Jennifer Chen was working for the people who covered up Project Neptune, admitting my knowledge would have compromised the investigation. Dr. Vance was nodding slowly. That makes sense. Thornton was transferred away from submarine operations in late 2004, just when the medical cover-up was becoming systematic. Blackwood eliminated her as a potential threat. Sarah realized they now had an eyewitness to the original conspiracy from within the command structure. "Admiral, what do you know about my father's investigation and his death?" Admiral Thornton's expression became grim. "Your father contacted me in 2018, just before his death. He had discovered communications between Blackwood, Morrison, and Dr. Chen discussing the suppression of Project Neptune medical evidence. He wanted to know if I had any documentation from my time as Blackwood's deputy. What did you tell him?" I told him I had been ordered to destroy all files related to Project Neptune when I was transferred. But I also told him that someone with higher authority than Blackwood was protecting the cover-up, because Blackwood herself seemed to be following orders rather than giving them. The revelation opened new questions about the scope of the conspiracy. If Admiral Blackwood had been taking orders from someone with even higher authority, the Project Neptune cover-up might have extended to the highest levels of naval command. "Do you know who was giving Blackwood her orders?" Sarah asked. Admiral Thornton shook her head. "No, but your father believed he was close to finding out. That's why his death was so suspicious. He died just days before he was scheduled to present his findings." The timing confirmed Sarah's worst fears about her father's murder. He had been killed specifically to prevent him from exposing the highest-level participants in the Project Neptune conspiracy. Dr. Vance was examining her documentation with new urgency. If there's someone above Blackwood who's still active, they would have the authority to eliminate anyone who threatens to expose the truth. Which means, Sarah realized, that Jennifer Chen is in immediate danger, and so are we. Sarah's secure phone buzzed at 2:47 a.m., jolting her awake in her Norfolk apartment. The message from Lieutenant Commander Walsh was brief but urgent. Jennifer Chen never came home from work yesterday. Her apartment shows signs of forced entry. Emergency meeting at 0600. As Sarah drove through the empty streets towards Building 83, her mind raced with possibilities. Jennifer Chen had been methodically building toward a major revelation about Project Neptune for months. If she had disappeared now, it meant either she had gone into hiding to complete her mission, or the conspiracy had finally identified and eliminated her. The secure conference room was already occupied when Sarah arrived. Admiral Thornton looked like she hadn't slept. Walsh was coordinating with multiple agencies on his laptop, and Dr. Vance sat quietly in the corner, clearly understanding that her decision to cooperate had put everyone at risk. Jennifer Chen was last seen leaving Naval Sea Systems at 1600 hours yesterday, Walsh reported. Her supervisor says she had been working overtime for weeks, compiling what she described as a comprehensive historical analysis of submarine operations. "Any indication she was planning to disappear voluntarily?" Admiral Thornton asked. "Her apartment was ransacked professionally. Computers missing, files destroyed, but personal items and valuables left untouched. This wasn't a burglary. Someone was looking for specific information." Sarah felt the familiar chill of recognizing a pattern. The same type of search that happened at Dr. Vance's house and my father's accident scene. Someone is systematically eliminating evidence and witnesses. Dr. Vance spoke up quietly. If they took Jennifer, they have access to whatever she was planning to reveal, but they also have her research files, which means they know exactly how much evidence we've gathered. The implication was sobering. The conspiracy now knew about Dr. Vance's documentation, Admiral Thornton's involvement, and Sarah's investigation. Everyone in the room had become a target. "There's something else," Walsh said, pulling up a message on his laptop. This was sent to the Washington Post, New York Times, and CNN at 300 this morning. He turned the screen so everyone could see. The message was short. Complete documentation of Project Neptune medical cover-up and related murders will be released in 6 hours unless the following individuals surrender themselves to federal authorities: former Captain James Morrison, former Admiral Patricia Blackwood's Superior Officer designation, classified, and current Deputy Chief of Naval Operations for Information Warfare. Sarah studied the message. Jennifer Chen is alive and forcing a confrontation. But why give them 6 hours warning? Because, Admiral Thornton said grimly, she wants them to panic and make mistakes that expose themselves. The Deputy Chief of Naval Operations for Information Warfare, that's the position with authority over communications, intelligence, and administrative systems across the entire Navy. Walsh was already accessing personnel files. The current Deputy Chief is Admiral Richard Hawthorne. He's held that position for 8 years, but before that, his finger stopped typing. He was Admiral Blackwood's superior during Project Neptune. Captain Hawthorne, assigned to Navy intelligence with oversight of submarine special operations. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Admiral Hawthorne had been the authority above Blackwood, the person who had ordered the medical cover-up and likely arranged Sarah's father's murder. Now he held one of the highest positions in the Navy, with the power to eliminate threats and suppress evidence on a massive scale. Hawthorne has the authority to order operations anywhere in the world, Admiral Thornton said. If he's been protecting the Project Neptune secret for 20 years, he has resources we can't match. Dr. Vance was examining the timeline again. But Jennifer Chen has been planning this for months. She must have anticipated that identifying Hawthorne would put her in danger. Sarah thought about Jennifer's methodical approach to releasing information. She's been building leverage. Each document release has given her more evidence and more credibility. Now she has enough proof to destroy Hawthorne's career and expose the entire conspiracy. But only if she stays alive long enough to release it, Walsh pointed out. Admiral Thornton stood up and began pacing. We need to find Jennifer Chen before Hawthorne's people do. She's our only witness who can testify about the scope of the conspiracy. And if we can't find her, then we use her strategy against Hawthorne. We force him to reveal himself by making the evidence public. Dr. Vance was coordinating with FBI and Naval Criminal Investigative Services contacts. I'm arranging federal protection for Dr. Vance and Sarah. If Hawthorne is cleaning house, you're both primary targets. As they prepared for what might be their final confrontation with a conspiracy that had operated for 20 years, Sarah's phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, but something made her answer. Sarah Martinez? The voice was female, young, and tense with fear. Yes, this is Jennifer Chen. I don't have much time. They found my safe house, but I managed to escape. I need to give you something before they catch me. Sarah put the call on speaker. Jennifer, where are you? Norfolk Botanical Garden, near the Japanese garden. I have backup copies of everything: Project Neptune files, medical records, communication intercepts, and proof that Admiral Hawthorne ordered your father's murder. Admiral Thornton was already moving toward the door. We're 15 minutes away. Can you stay hidden that long? I'll try. But Sarah, if something happens to me, check your father's personal effects. He hid something that proves Hawthorne's involvement, something the investigators missed when they cleared his workspace. The line went dead. Sarah felt a surge of hope mixed with terror. Jennifer Chen was alive and had the evidence they needed, but she was also being hunted by people with unlimited resources and no hesitation about committing murder. 20 minutes later, they found Jennifer Chen sitting on a bench near the Japanese garden pond, a laptop bag clutched in her hands and exhaustion evident in every line of her body. She looked younger than her 34 years, but her eyes held the determination of someone who had sacrificed everything for truth. I've been living in hiding for 3 days, Jennifer said as they approached, ever since I realized they had identified me as the source of the document releases. Admiral Thornton sat beside her. How much evidence do you have? Jennifer opened her laptop and showed them a comprehensive database containing thousands of documents. Everything: medical records, operational orders, communication intercepts, financial records showing payments to suppress witnesses, and Admiral Hawthorne's personal involvement in covering up Project Neptune. Sarah examined the files, recognizing many documents from her father's investigation, but seeing them now as part of a larger pattern. This proves systematic murder and conspiracy reaching the highest levels of the Navy. More than that, Jennifer said, it proves that Project Neptune wasn't the only program where crews were exposed to dangerous conditions and then abandoned when they developed health problems. Hawthorne used the same model for at least 6 other submarine operations over 15 years. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. Hundreds of sailors had been injured, dozens had died, and families had been destroyed while Admiral Hawthorne built his career on missions that treated human lives as expendable resources. "Why now?" Dr. Vance asked. "Why expose this after 20 years?" Jennifer's expression became painful. "My father killed himself because he couldn't live with what he had done to those sailors. He left me a letter explaining his involvement and begging me to someday find a way to make things right. It took me 4 years to get the security clearance and access I needed to gather this evidence." Sarah understood the personal cost Jennifer had paid for justice. Like Sarah, she had lost her father to the Project Neptune conspiracy, but Jennifer had spent years methodically building a case that could finally expose the truth. "We need to get this evidence to federal prosecutors immediately," Admiral Thornton said. "With your testimony and Dr. Vance's documentation, we can ensure Hawthorne faces justice." Jennifer shook her head. "Hawthorne has contacts throughout the federal system. I've been monitoring his communications. He's already reached out to Justice Department officials and congressional staff, claiming that any allegations against him are part of a foreign disinformation campaign." "Then we go public," Sarah said. "Release everything to the media simultaneously, create so much attention that it can't be suppressed." "That's exactly what I'm going to do," Jennifer confirmed. "In 2 hours, every major news organization will receive complete copies of this database, along with video testimony from each of us explaining the evidence." As they prepared to record their testimonies, Sarah thought about her father's sacrifice and the courage it had taken for Jennifer Chen to risk everything for justice. Project Neptune had destroyed dozens of lives and hidden the truth for 20 years, but finally the conspiracy was about to be exposed. Admiral Hawthorne had built his career on the suffering of submarine crews and the murder of anyone who threatened to expose his crimes. But Jennifer Chen's methodical investigation and the cooperation of surviving witnesses had finally assembled evidence that even his powerful position couldn't suppress. The truth about Project Neptune was about to be revealed, ensuring that the sailors who had suffered and died would finally receive justice and that their families would understand their sacrifice had meaning beyond the operations that destroyed their lives. Sarah looked at Jennifer Chen, Dr. Vance, and Admiral Thornton, 4 women who had refused to let the Project Neptune conspiracy remain buried. In a few hours, their courage would ensure that 20 years of murder and cover-up would finally face the justice that Sarah's father had died trying to achieve. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.